This is the next or another talk in the Learning Talk series that we plan to run today. My name is Fred Fulton. I work in the Learning Department here at the IFRC in Geneva, and I'm here with my colleague Margareta Griffiths. We work collectively on some of these webinars. Today we'll have Don present from the Learning Agents in Canada, who is consulting for the Humanitarian Passport Initiative for the Humanitarian Leadership Academy. Don will be talking about open badges and how the humanitarian sector is starting to engage with that a little bit more closely. Before I hand over to Don, I will talk a little bit about the Learning Talk series. This first Learning Talk series is designed to create some insights or provide some insights and explore different aspects of learning, from the art of the possible in learning and gamification and user-generated content to, for instance, social learning, learning communities and cultures, and organizational learning. The idea is that if each week or so or two, we will have a new talk from a new presenter, and those talks will be both videoed and put in our Facebook group, a Red Cross Requestant Learning Facebook group, but also we intend to run webinars like this one today, where the presenter is able to engage with the audience, with the participants. Along with today's talk, we have a variety of other talks that have already happened and are being lined up. So we have, for instance, we have had a talk already around the practical process of creating modern learning approaches in national societies. We've had a talk already around creating effective modern learning with little or no budget, so we're using an agile learning process. We've heard from Francesca Bertolini around real-life scenario-based gaming, and that is also available in the Facebook group as a video recording. We'll hear from Don, but we will also hear from others around social learning and scaffolded social learning, how to create engaged learning communities, the socially dynamic organization, learning technology architecture, and also looking at organizational learning and sustainable action research. So coming back to today's discussion, we're very thankful to have Don present with us here today. And Don will talk for approximately half an hour, I believe, but we'll also have pauses as he goes. And then at the end of the conversation, the floor is, of course, open for questions and comments that you can make either by raising your hand in the chat forum, or you can unmute yourself and make the question then. Whilst Don is talking, if you wouldn't mind, please do mute yourself so that we don't have much noise interference on the call. We're very excited to hear from you, Don, today. We have had several discussions in the past, of course, and as I think you may well mention shortly, we are discussing the possibility of piloting some of this activity with one or two of our national societies, including the Mexican Red Cross. So without further ado, I'll pass the floor to you, Don, and thanks very much.
I think it's still mute. There we go. Thank you very much, Fred. And it's a pleasure to be here. I should say to begin with that there's going to be a shorter version of this in the Facebook page. There is a shorter version of this recording of this in the Facebook page. Here's the session where I actually take a breath between slides. So I'll just start sharing the screen here. And I hope everybody can see that. I'm going to go into presentation mode. And does everybody see that, a full screen Humanitarian Passport Initiative? Nod your head, Fred, if you see it. Okay, great. So, so this initiative got underway a number of years back, but is picking up steam now as we speak, and should be in full flower by the end of 2019, and will be soft launching in stages up until then. I've been brought in to work with open badges, but there are a number of moving parts and pieces to this that are being brought into play by a consortium of agencies. It's being led by the Humanitarian Leadership Academy at the moment, but the whole notion is that that's just an incubation phase, and it gets pushed out as its own sort of separate entity sometime, I believe, in 2019, and then fully autonomous, fully independent by 2020. Well, why are we doing this? The reason we're doing this is we want to support responders. We want to support people around the world to prepare for and respond to crises in their own countries. And this is a wide swath of people. It's people who just start volunteering, all the way up to people who are, you know, the heads of missions, heads of initiatives to actually deal with some of the crises that happen. So the coordinators, the senior management, and even the mid-management. So, and what's their learning context? Well, the world is not such that we can take a course on everything we need. We have to learn as we go, and the world is volatile, it's uncertain, complex, ambiguous, and sometimes dangerous. Those people who wear t-shirts that say "not a target," they do that for a reason. So, and there are not neat little boxes in terms of where the knowledge is and where you can find it and what you know and what you don't know. And you have to sort of make it up as you go along, as you're solving problems, as you're living your life and helping others. So one of the solutions to that, Fred was talking about agile approaches to learning. Competency-based learning supports agile approaches to learning because you can work competency by competency. People are talking the same language of about what the person knows and can do by the time you either bring them into a situation or you're preparing them for a situation. Another one, and this is out of Australia, this particular diagram, is the notion of 70-20-10. So I was talking about there not being a course for everything, but often you may want to start with a course, and that would be the learning event, the 10% down at the bottom. That would be a workshop, a webinar such as this one, perhaps a learning portal like the learning portal for IFRC, ICRC, and you would start with that, but then if the learning is well designed, or if you're adaptable, you start reaching out to others. You start asking people you know to help you solve a particular issue. You reach into communities of practice. You start looking at what other people have said about this. You have coaches, you have mentors. So that's the social part. That's the learning momentum part they're talking about. And then most of what you do is just actually doing your work. So that's action learning, that's solving problems, it's work integrated learning. Say you're being put in for a placement and you're being monitored by somebody else, something like an apprenticeship, and you're shadowing people and you're getting involved in projects and doing so-called stretch assignments. So that is the balance really that we're looking at, and a lot of people have an instinctive respect for the formal learning of the learning event. It's structured, you walk in, you know you're going to learn something, but most of the learning happens outside of the classroom. And this is an attempt to capture that. The one on the left is developed by a fellow Canadian, Alec Kouros. He did this back, I think, in 2006, just talking about the different places you reach out to for knowledge and learning. And that includes technology, but it also includes people. The people could be colleagues, it could be family, people in your community, and then also documents, etc. So this is captured in a different way over on the right. The notion of learning communities, having tools that you build with, experts that you actually specifically reach out to. So all of this is intended to add up to a learning approach that enables local relevance. So it's not just coming from headquarters and disseminated from top down. It's bidirectional. It's even multi-directional. It's learning and sharing and people helping each other find the best solutions to the problems that they're collaboratively trying to face. So this is a little more HLA specific in terms of the content of the slide, but I like it because it talks about a four-pronged approach. One of which is to provide content more openly. So the notion of open access to content, mapping learning resources to standards and competency frameworks, and then enabling access. So we have the learning platform that Fred's associated with and you were taking courses on. We also have other portals such as Kaya, and there's another one, disasterready.org, and learning centers out in the field. And we have ways of recognizing learning down in the bottom left, recognizing learning skills and experience. So we're going to be spending most of our time on that today. And then organizations that can help. So these would be local training and learning providers, local consulting organizations, the people from the center helping out towards the edges, people from the edges helping towards the center. And that's the kind of multi-pronged approach that needs to be followed, because no one solution is going to have an entire solution. So this is about opening up. And so some examples of opening up recognition would be what we're talking about today, certifications, proxies for certification that might be digital, that might be sort of a little more 21st century, not just paper-based, something you could share in your mobile, and then programs, collaboration on programs in terms of certification, and giving people the confidence that a training program that they're going to take or a qualification program that they're going to follow will be valued and will be seen as quality. So just a little more detail about this. I'll show you a diagram a little later on, but there's one of the elements of the Humanitarian Passport is a collaboration center for recognition of skills. And they're developing a series of certifications of knowledge of the core humanitarian competencies framework. So you see the first three that have 2017 on the left there. Those are now out there and badged, and you can test yourself against that knowledge and be certified for that knowledge, which could help you in your career. Over on the right, this is where we're going to spend our time, is talking about how those certifications and those validations, those claims can be supported by a digital infrastructure that can make your footprint, make your capabilities better known in a global sense, so people can find you and you can find new opportunities to work on. So I'll just pause for a moment here. Is the pace good for people? Are there any questions that have come up, Fred, so far? Okay, I'll take that as a note and move on. So,
no questions so far.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So this brings me to open badges, and I could go on forever about this, so I'll try and keep it short. It's I'm starting to call it a token of recognition. So a lot of people just go straight to calling it a micro-credential, and often it is a micro-credential. And by micro-credential, people mean something that may not be a full credential, may be a partial credential, and there's some implication of stackability within that. So skill 1, skill 2, skill 3, all the way up to 6, and you get the certification that you know this thing. So that's one way of looking at it. It could also be, though, a recognition of service, a recognition of working on a particular campaign or mission or crisis, and that actually says something about you, says something about what you went through and the kind of service that you might have provided. So it's a digital representation of something, an accomplishment, an interest, or an affiliation. It's visual. It's got metadata. That's a geeky word that basically just means structured information that allows it to be recognized in different contexts. So fields that are sort of set up and have to be filled out in a certain way. And as an open artifact, you can present it in different places from where you earned it. So let's say you earned it inside the learning platform. You present it inside LinkedIn. That's a new context, but the same document is there. Essentially, it's a mini document, that it's a sort of a miniature learning record of what you know and can do. It enables stackability, pathways, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. There's a visual branding aspect to it. So in other words, you are showing, it's like when you wear a, I don't know, a Nike t-shirt, you're showing the Nike brand. In this case, you might be showing a brand of something that's maybe a little more meaningful. So in other words, about disaster relief or helping people. You're displaying that brand, you're displaying your knowledge in that field. You're also displaying the brand of the organization that issued it to you. So organizations find that this is a good way of turning their stakeholders, their members, into brand advocates for them to help get their message out. It's an online trust system, and by that I mean you present a certificate that has a name. So I'm just talking about that rather gruesome image there on the left of the peeled away rib cage. Basically, it's got a name, it's got a description, high-level description saying what it's about. It's got the criteria. That's the beating heart of the system because it talks about what it took to get that and what evidence potentially had to be provided for that. Is there a date of issue? Is there an expiry date, or is it good forever? And what standards does it apply to? So if you present that, it's not just like you're presenting a picture. It is a picture, but it's got data inside. When you look at the data, you realize there is meaning to that. And a lot of that data is links that link back to the organization that gave it to you, link back to the course that you might have earned it from, or the standards that it relates to. So it builds up trust in authentic ways. So here's a picture of open badges where they fit in the credentialing universe. Not all open badges are credentials, so actually they are credentials. Not all of them are necessarily micro-credentials. Some micro-credentials may not have an image. They may just be a line in a syllabus, for example. Some of them might be professional digital credentials. They are digital badges, but not all digital badges are open badges if they're not set up according to the standard. I have that little doggy biscuit circled in red there, and what I mean there is Fred was talking about gamification, and I think that's a wonderful approach to learning. My issue when people talk about gamification early on in terms of badges is that tends to trivialize them, and where I talk about badges, where I start with badges is in the recognition of learning. So the portability of this, the summative value of having this badge either to you or to the person you're showing it to, that's an important place to start, as opposed to what might be sticker charts in a course saying, oh good, you completed module 1, good for you, here's your badge. There are important side benefits that can be had from those gamification aspects, and I'll talk a bit about those in a later slide, but I think it's a mistake when you're talking about open badges to start thinking in terms of rewards and patting people on the back for making their way along a pathway. So here's the slide where I do talk about the different ways of doing it. Where we're focused is the assessment and the recognition of learning. That learning can be formal, it can be non-formal, informal. It's a way of recognizing membership and status. I'll show you an example of membership badges, a couple of examples of those. It's a way of showing, mapping learning pathways. So where people can set goals thinking, I want to end up being an expert logistician. What do I have to do to get there? And look at what other people in that position might have, perhaps in terms of badges. And if you get those too, you're getting close to where they are. It's a way of looking back on what you have done. So they're like pebbles of memory, the memory pebbles of what you've gone through. So you can look inside the badge and say, oh, I did learn that, and that will help me in my interview for this next position, for example. And there is an element of motivation of learning, but as I say, we recommend people don't start there. So I say the reason I go on about open badges so much is I increasingly see them as transparent lenses on your vision of learning, whether you're the organization or an individual. So let me go through that and talk about what I mean. Let's talk about the learning experience. Is it a course, or is it a work-integrated learning program? Is there a learning contract, or is it possibly a challenge of a competency? And are you learning by yourself, or are you learning with others? So that's one thing. The criteria. Are there learning objectives, or are that would be a minimum? but ideally there might be learning outcomes or there might be competencies that you are trying to deliver to people. And are those competencies or objectives domain specific, or are they transversal? Are they things like leadership and communication that you're trying to foster? And are they endorsed by some other organization who can help you get people to engage with what you're trying to teach them? In terms of assessment, is it simply just invigilated psychometric exams, or do you provide, for example, people to the opportunity to assemble evidence packages or portfolios to say that I do know this and here's how I can show you? Is it a skills demonstration where they actually do show you right in front of you? And are there rubrics for evaluating that? There's a number of tools out there for doing that. In terms of recognition, is it just a pathway marker? So in other words, you got this stage, keep on going to the milestone, or maybe this stage, it's worthwhile showing to people because it will enable you to take a further step in your career. Is it a certification, or is it something a little lesser than that? And again, has it been endorsed? Possibly, is there evidence that can be embedded inside the badge? And there are a number of ways of doing that. We're actually working on a few ways as we speak. In terms of transferability, is it just internal to your organization? If it's a big organization, that's a big place. That's an ecosystem in and of itself. But maybe you have bilateral agreements with other organizations. So your personal security and safety program may be recognized by that other organization. It could save both organizations money in terms of maintaining that course. Are there sectoral standards that we're talking about? So I mentioned the core humanitarian competencies framework. Having something out there that's other to the various organizations that they all can point to, that actually increases the value, the exchangeable currency of the credentials that we're talking about here. And then global frameworks, even better. There are a number of global frameworks out there. So EQF is one, the European Qualifications Framework, or even ESCO, the European Skills and Competencies Framework. So, and then in terms of impact, often learning is measured by inputs. How many people took the course? What's sometimes crudely called bums and seats. How many bums and seats did you have? Okay, we delivered that much learning. People finished the course. But what did they learn? If you have these badges properly designed, essentially what you have is learning outcomes analytics, where you say, these people know this now in this area. So you could run reports, for example, on how many people in Tanzania have logistics or personal safety and security up to this level at this level of the hierarchy. You can start running those reports and making what IBM calls skills heat maps. So you could also have developed evidence for accreditation of yourself as an organization. So if you want to be accredited by as a quality organization, you're able to run reports and show what impact you've had as a learning organization. It's also feedback loops. So in other words, when people apply for badges and they reflect on their learning in terms of their application, they're giving feedback on what they've learned, which gives you insights on how you may want to adjust your learning. So it's a quality feedback loop. So, and then after the badge is issued, it has a life. It's not just, it stops dead when it's issued. People are using these badges in different contexts. That's what I call the social life of badges. And it's additional valorization of the badge as, for example, an employer, that's one with the personal safety and security. If an employer, more employers say that personal safety and security badge is useful to them and they'll just take it, they'll just recognize it, then the value of that badge goes up accordingly. So it's a whole economy builds up, and you have a lens. This looks a bit like a, I don't know, a housefly's eye or something, but essentially it all adds up to quality, and you just keep on looking at it to figure out ways of improving it. So this is just an attempt to map the spectrum of lifelong, life-wide learning and how badges can potentially support that. Everything from what I call the talent pipeline over on the left, sort of low stakes. We recognize your volunteer experience, but then slowly working up, you know, you took a course, good self-directed course, here's a badge. You actually were assessed on this, here's a better badge. And now you're actually certified in this area. So we're going to be having PMD Pro badges, for example. That's quite meaningful, and that's often used in a hiring context. Do you have the PMD Pro 1 certification, for example? What they are is diverse signals of capability and potential. So you may not have all high stakes badges, but if you have enough of these things in the right topic areas, and people can look at them and get a picture of your interests and where your career trajectory, this can help you actually make your way, navigate your way through your career. So just some quick examples. City Guilds is probably familiar to a number of people, especially in the UK. It's a global awarding body, really. And they have made a partnership with the World Chefs. And so you see the various badges related to that on the top left. So if you wanted to get the badge for sous chef, you would pay an amount of money, and then you would look at the standards. You'd probably look at the standards first, then pay an amount of money, and then align yourself to the various standards and the levels of performance that you're looking for. And then you would go and demonstrate your capability to in a proctored process, and an evaluator, an assessor would look at that and either award you that badge or not. And you can then take that as a stepping stone for the next stage in your career, all the way up to being something like a master chef. So that's one example. Another one is the Learning and Performance Institute. This is typically HR training people. This is another UK organization. Typically HR training people within organizations. And this is a wide variety of badges that they're doing. I quite like it for that. So they have membership badges on the left, and they have sort of emeritus members, fellows. That's sort of a higher level of membership that they're awarding or recognizing. They also have learning awards. So if you've been a particularly good learning organization, you can earn a badge as an organization as well as an individual, and probably display that on your web page. In the middle, we have the notion of learning departments, independent learning providers, particular technologies that have been accredited as being useful in the context, and then facilities, if you're just providing facilities to people. Over on the right, it's all about individuals. I've been a facilitator since 2010, or I have been a certified performance consultant since I was in 2007. Some of these say since, and some of these basically say just the year. And I think since shows you've been around for a long time. It's good for organizations, whereas for individuals, I think they focus just on the currency of your skills at the moment. So I really like that. It's a nice wide swath of application. Here, IBM has been jumping all over badges over the last 2 to 3 years, and they've achieved a lot of success. I think they've issued 500,000 badges already across their landscape, typically for courses and MOOCs and things like that. So they have different kinds. One of them is knowledge. So you take a course, you get a knowledge badge. Another one would be skill. So there's an element of assessment there. You know, did you learn what we were teaching you? But beyond that, they have what they would call proficiency. Would be, you know, can we depend on you to do this job in this particular context? More like a competency. And then here would be achievement. So were you instrumental in getting this new technology launched in this particular region of the world? That, you know, will recognize that contribution you made. And these are the people that I was talking about mapping skills. So if you wanted to map how many people have taken personal safety and security courses in theaters of operation where there is danger, and just to see, you know, how are we doing here, that's the kind of thing that IBM is talking about, except what they'd be talking about is who has these big data skills in the particular market. Deakin University is disrupting the degree. Deakin University is a large research-based university in Melbourne, and they started at the master's level. They had an advantage because over on the left, that blue box, they have the Australian qualifications framework, which is very much like the European one. It's got a few different levels around the undergraduate level. But it's a way of mapping complexity of learning and the level of learning, level of sophistication that people have in what they know and can do. So what they've said is we can modularize the degree and essentially offer it to people at a fraction of the cost and a fraction of the time by focusing on transversal skills. And those would be ones such as communication, emotional judgment, cultural engagement, global citizenship, problem solving. So at the master's level, if you're in your mid-30s and you've been managing teams and missions, you probably have a lot of these skills already, and you probably have evidence that shows you have these skills. For $500 Australian per badge, you can, similarly to the World Chefs, you can challenge those badges and be assessed for them, and they say more rigorously than in a typical master's program. And then just spend a small amount of money, in this case at the bottom here for professional practice financial planning, it's about $15K, and for a master's in information technology, it's about $13K. So that's the core domain courses that you have to take, but all the others are soft skills that you have done one by one, in piece by piece, in times that support you, instead of having to take 2 years out of your life to get a master's program and spend a ton of money while not being paid to do that. So to me, that's a really exciting prospect. And actually, I've connected some people within HPI to this business operation now to look into it further. I mentioned ESCO, European Skills and Competencies. They've actually set up their whole sort of table of occupations and skills and qualifications as a database that can be spoken to. It's got a way of having your, I'll have my website talk to your website kind of thing happening. And they've used it for a proof of concept. This was a Summer of Code this summer in Belgium, where they were developing badges to endorse skills based on the approved ESCO vocabulary using this web service. A very exciting little application, and we're looking forward to seeing more things like this and sort of more sophistication, more complexity, more usefulness as time goes on. Actually, maybe I should pause there a little bit because I was going to put a little chapter thing. Any questions currently, Fred? Am I confusing people sufficiently?
I think no questions so far. It's extremely interesting.
Okay, good. So learning pathways, we were talking about that a bit earlier, and this diagram is an attempt to get people sort of thinking about more than one kind of learning pathway. Normally what people think of learning pathways, you need to do this, 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 and this, and then we will give you this. That's the stepping stone, and they would call that sequential and prescriptive. So you have to do steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in that order, or else you don't get the thing. Another approach is to have a collection or a cluster of badges. So that would be nonlinear. You get these in any order. Still prescriptive, because they say you have to have either all of these or at least 7 of these 10 before we give it to you. But the interesting one that people love talking about is the constellation, and that's more descriptive. So in other words, what have you done, and what does that add up to? What picture does that draw? So is it a Big Dipper, or is it the Hunter, or whatever? So that would be nonlinear and descriptive, not prescriptive. So for that, it might be, you might give people indications. You know, if you have a lot of badges in this area, we would probably look at you more like. Or if you, starting out in a particular role, were to look at some of the experts in that role and just look at the badges that they have, you might think, well, you know, if I get those, that might sort of cause me to be considered as somebody that might be able to work with that person or work in that person's type of capacity. So that's some different ways of looking at it. Here's a very linear one, but I don't know how prescriptive it is. This is Irish higher education, and they're developing digital skills, and this is typically for faculty. And I just like it because it's, you know, it looks like the London Underground, and so they have the different learning themes, and then you have stations along the track for lessons or competencies or learning objectives for those particular themes. So it's just a fun way of displaying what's available in a small amount of space. So let me just provide some examples about open badges for humanitarians so far, and then I'll talk about what we're working toward. A little while back, Oxfam was looking at badges for logistics. They aren't doing it right now, to be honest. So I'm actually on my list is to sort of knock on their door and ask what's going on with that, especially since the Humanitarian Logistics Association was a founding member of this Humanitarian Passport Initiative. DisasterReady.org, I've already mentioned this. So Atish Gonzalez actually started this before he moved over to the Humanitarian Leadership Academy. But essentially, the message there is when the individual shares these badges in the social networks, they are demonstrating the value of the learning that they've had, they're demonstrating what they know and can do, and so it's that sort of bi-directional branding of both the individual and the organization that has enabled them. PHAP, Professionals in Humanitarian Assistance and Protection, I mentioned them, and they're actually part of the Humanitarian Passport Initiative. They have membership badges, and these aren't just, sign up and be a member. You actually have to be a working member in the sector, and you actually have to, meet that requirement, and then also pay a membership fee, and then you're allowed to produce this proof of membership or certification. So the credentialing along the bottom, those are those three I mentioned that are in place. There are another three that are following up that map to other parts of the CHCF later on, coming out later this, I guess, more like next year. This is one I'm about to start to work on, actually. It's related to the Humanitarian Passport Initiative. It's Doctors Without Borders Operational Center in Barcelona is starting a project called TEMBO, which is an internal innovation fund project within the MSF movement. And essentially, it's a structured environment. So down at the bottom right, the space for them to control and curate their learning, allows them to access learning resources. It's a space for them to connect to the knowledge network and integrated tools and practices. So it's meant to be all their stuff in one place. And it's actually running on a similar technology as the Kaya system that I've mentioned earlier. The idea here is, let's say you're coming into the movement and starting work in security. You would take security courses to begin with. They would enroll you, help you get started in some of the communities of practice around security. They might connect you to security advisors and people just coming back from their first mission. What I wish I'd known when I'd gone out. That might be video interviews, but then you could follow up with those people. You'd have resources you could look up, the manuals, the field guides, etc. Check out the social media that sort of public, semi-public, and private social media that might be set up around that, and then start processing that for yourself in terms of the notes you would make, the goals you would set for yourself, possibly being advised by somebody else in terms of what you're going to learn this mission, what you need to know, what you want to learn, and what you're going to come back with and springboard into the next mission later on with. So that's an interesting vision. We'll see how that one plays out. I'll to be presenting about that in the future somewhere. So here's basically mapping the Humanitarian Passport Initiative. There's the Collaboration Center for Quality Learning and Human Action, that's based in Lyon, and that's accrediting learning and development organizations. Over on the left, there's PHAP that I've mentioned. They're actually leading the Collaboration Center for the Recognition of Humanitarian Skills. So they're the ones, you see that orange is the map of the core humanitarian competencies framework and how they're coming up with certifications that map to those. In the center is the Humanitarian Passport, which I'm told I can now say is going to be rebranded as something called HPass. Nice short little label, and so that is going to be the name, and we're just going through a rebranding phase right now. It's the hub. So it's where individuals and organizations come together in terms of what's needed, what's being offered, and where things are moving. And it's fed by learning portals such as the learning platform that Fred and his colleagues are associated with, the Kaya learning platform, and DisasterReady.org. So this is sort of a simple sort of organogram to show you where it's going. I will say that the collaboration centers are going to basically collapse in to HPass. So it will become its own entity with these elements folded in as appropriate. So it ends up being thought of as an organic entity rather than a bunch of pieces. Currently being incubated by the Humanitarian Leadership Academy, they'll be off the scene by 2020. So founding members, Bioforce Institute, and a number of other ones here. We're reaching out, as Fred says, to IFRC and also ICRC. And then Humantum is coming on board with PMD Pro badges. I'll show you an example of that. Médecins Sans Frontières. Save the Children are developing a program for training of trainers, working with World Vision International and others. I was just talking to Danish Church Aid. They may be coming on. So a number of people are quite interested in this, and there are a number of ways of getting involved. So it's, I'll just show you a diagram of how it works. Basically, it's a Siamese twin system. It's a badge issuing platform, that's Open Badge Factory. And what we're doing right now is we're setting up organizations who want to play or want to experiment with pro bono accounts that are good until the end of March 2018, fairly reasonably priced after then. I can provide that detail if you need. And that's provided by a Finnish organization called Descendum, who's made a partnership with the HLA, Humanitarian Leadership Academy. So that issuing platform, you can issue badges for people showing up in workshops. You can give them claim codes. You can set up partner networks, a number of ways of issuing. You can also issue via learning platforms. So complete a course, automatically get a badge issued, etc. So Totara, for example, is the platform that's behind Kaya. So complete a course or a series of courses in Kaya, you get the badge, and that's, we're developing one for Humanitarian Essentials and Humanitarian Essentials MOOC that they run as a result of that. So those badges are flowed to a dedicated passport that's going to be called HPass, where this is free to end users, and they would be able to store their badges there, different kinds of badges from different kinds of places. They don't all have to come from Open Badge Factory. They can come from other sources as long as they support the Open Badge standard. They can curate those badges into pages if they like. So in other words, let's say they're going for a particular job, and they want to arrange their badges and some other evidence they have so they can adjust their CV. They can present that page as a free sort of micro portfolio to the prospective employer. Or they can simply share them to social media, including Mozilla Backpack, which I always include because that began as kind of like the reference platform as a place to store badges. So that's a sort of technical, very high-level technical view of the system, showing that piece where you have the issuing on the left and then the badge storage focused on end users on the right for free. The subscription based on the left for issuing organizations. So this is my big slide showing the vision. I developed this first back in 2015. I think it's led to some of the activity that we're involved in now. See what you think of it. Basically, it starts with the learner, in this case, the humanitarian responder. They are earning badges, tokens of recognition from various sources, including the HPass system. Other organizations may be issuing badges as well. Here's just some examples. Local learning and development providers may be providing learning courses or assessing learning. They may themselves be assessed and badged. Also, there's just, a wild west of MOOCs and open ed resources, personal learning networks, ways of becoming recognized. All of those may be generating open badges. They can be curated in what will be called the HPass. Those badges that are in there have more value if they're actually aligned, so when people look at them or when people are searching for them, they can say, show me the badges that are related to personal safety and security, and that can come up with a way of filtering what could be a large number of badges. They can also be endorsed. So endorsement might be something simple as an organization saying people who come to us with these badges will give them a different experience, or it could be a standards organization saying this is quality, and we recognize these badges as quality badges. They're shared to social media. This part is emergent, but there's nothing stopping HRIS systems or talent management systems to interoperate with badges that the learner may choose to share and have be available for other systems to look at. The whole idea is to build a skills marketplace that enables career pathways and forms of external recognition, well, recognition both internal and external, whether that be for hiring the person in the first place, or recruiting for a mission, recruiting possibly for a new role in the organization. As you start in one capacity, say you start in security and move into logistics, something like that, you transfer skills across and then you supplement with other skills. Maybe you're looking for academic recognition from Deakin, or maybe other universities are ready to offer that. Or maybe you're just, you've done your bit and you're ready to move on. Can it help you find a new career based on the skills you've developed in the humanitarian sector? So along the bottom, that takes you all the way from the talent pipeline, that first experience you have in your home country before you get involved in the movement, to recruitment, induction, building teams, managing performance and emerging talent, tracking experience, tracking achievements, and then identifying emerging leaders, emerging subject matter experts, that kind of thing, and everything all the way out to career change and outplacement. So that's my big map, and when I do it slowly, I think it's somewhat understandable. So I just wanted to wind up a bit in terms of assessment strategies, because again, people sometimes, just like learning pathways, people can have a notion, very boxed in notions about what constitutes good assessment, what constitutes quality. So most of the badges, quite frankly, are still being issued, still being tacked onto courses. Take the course, get the badge. Ideally, you were assessed, or maybe you weren't assessed, and it's still useful. But course badge. Sort of quick reverse into the other direction would be a psychometric assessment. So you go and take an exam, and then that's the way you're assessed. That can be expensive. It can also be somewhat not accessible. Where we're looking on exploring is other ways of recognizing, validating, and accrediting learning. And actually, we're going to be doing this rather aggressively with the MSF Barcelona people in terms of field recognition of field skills, and following these kinds of guidelines. And I'm just going to move to the end, because I think we're actually running out of time here. These are some assessment methods we're going to be looking at. Not just exams, but also interviews and ways of demonstrating the learning. We're moving forward, piloting with organizations, very much focused on the organizations now rather than individuals, because we need to be offering a lot of badges in order for people to be interested in this. So we're very much interested in talking to national societies such as Mexican Red Cross, that we're exploring this with now, but other national societies as well. That's an example of the PhD Pro badge that will be available. And we're going to be talking about this at a panel in Bologna later this month. So just to say, please join us in our exploration, especially if you're an issuer at this point, but by all means join us as well, and go to the website to do that. If you want to find out about that, please contact me below. And I'll just go back here, and we'll leave that contact information up for a moment, and then unshare. Can you unshare, or can I unshare? Oh, yeah, stop sharing. There we go.
John, thank you very much for a very interesting and very comprehensive presentation. Sorry, there seems to be a lot of feedback. So we have about 5 minutes or so left. And the floor is now open for questions. So if you have a question, please either raise your hand or unmute yourself and pose a question or comment. Thank you.
Don, this is John Crowley. I'm the manager of knowledge and learning here at IFRC. A question for you. Let's say that this is wildly successful and we have more and more badges coming in place for both formal and informal recognition of both formal and informal methods of learning. What does the humanitarian system's human capital and our management of it look like 5 or 10 years from now?
Don, we can't hear you.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Sorry, I thought I unmuted myself. John, that's a great question. I would first of all refer to that map that I built with all the pieces in it. But I think another way of approaching it would be thinking in terms of use cases. So if you're a pool leader and you're wanting to manage the talent in your pool, what are the best ways of managing it? And what kinds of opportunities can you bring people into contact with? If you're somebody who's recruiting for a mission, you would be able to search for people who might have the language skill you need, the experience you need, and the technical skill you need, and the experience of working in a dangerous environment. So you'd be able to run these reports and partial matches and then fill in. It's not meant to replace human contact and interviews or things like that. It's simply brought in as a way of providing a picture of people that is distinct from what's out there now, which is very unvisual and typically put in very stilted language and is really difficult to track and see career vectors. I don't know how that answers your question. Go part way?
Yeah, Don, it does, and I think the second part of that is what we often see in the humanitarian sector is only partial adoption of new ideas, and then they compete with other ones. How will HPI compete with the standard way of doing things? Will it become more complicated? Is this another layer? Or is this something where it's going to be so much easier than what we're doing that there'll be the migration to it?
That's a really, okay, now I'm understanding your question a little better. I think there will always be barriers posed by legacy systems that aren't set up for it. So when I mentioned talent management systems or HRIS systems, if the vendors don't get the message that people are interested in having these badges, then maybe they'll be disrupted out of existence, or maybe they'll successfully say, well, don't bother about this, it'll go away. That would be a risk. I think what's the advantage of this is that it's not monolithic. It's small and simple and granular. So you could do things in small ways, just supplementing. So in other words, it could be somebody's profile that now has some badges in it. That could just be as simple as that. And you could have ways of recognizing learning that don't have to be integrated in your learning management system, could run in parallel with it, and then again, you just maybe give the capacity of displaying the badges inside the person's learning profile. So I think it can exist symbiotically with the system, and there are a couple of pathways it could take. It could disrupt the large platforms, large systems for doing things, or it could simply be seen as a way of adding information, a way of getting information and getting to the interview stage quicker with less wasted time, because you're identifying people in more global ways, and people are understanding what's required in more visual, more accessible ways. So you can get to the nub quicker, which is people to people, talking about who are you, where do you want to go, how can I help you get there, how can you help me deal with this mission.
Thank you.
Thanks, Don.
Thanks, John, for your questions, and Don for your answers. I'm afraid we're coming up to the end of the time allocated for this webinar, and we're getting booted out of the room. So So I think the idea should be that if there are any other questions, Mette, I think, also sent a question through about the...
If you can send your email through the chat, so all participants can receive it, please.
Don,
hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, if Don can put the last slide up with his email, that's all I wanted really, because I can just as easily ask him the question over email, but it disappeared too quickly. I couldn't write it down.
No problems. Thank you very much. Thanks, Mette, for the question. And
thank you.
I'm afraid that is going to be the end of our session, but thank you very much, Don, for giving us a very articulate and extensive overview of the program. I think there's a lot of interest there. I think there's a lot of there's a lot of discussion to be had as well. As we said earlier, we're going to take the recording of this webinar and put it into the Facebook group that we have, the Red Cross or Crescent Learning Facebook. And so if there are any other comments, questions, suggestions, please feel free to engage there. Thank you very much again, Don, and thank you everybody for joining.
Thanks for the opportunity. Great to talk to you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Don.
John, great question. I'd love to follow up after.